So I am making this video because I believe the world is finally coming into a stage where people can hear these stories. We're coming into a time where we're waking up to the real effects of mental illness, and we're finally having some true awareness and compassion for those that suffer with things like depression and anxiety and bipolar and mania disorder. But there is one mental illness that is very close to my heart that still has a lot of stigma around it, and there are so many people who are suffering from it or who have family members who are suffering from it, and their voices are still silenced in a lot of ways. Silenced by fear of being stigmatized, silenced by not being understood, silenced by afraid that other people will be afraid of them if they share their real struggle with schizophrenia. And the crazy irony of that fear stigma is that schizophrenia is technically one of the least violent mental disorders that one could have, and yet it's the one that we as a society, as a world, are often the most afraid of. So today I would like to tell the story of my sweet mom, Kathy, who actually passed away in May 2020. So she's not alive now to tell her story, and oh my God, I'm already getting emotional. Going into this video, I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to be emotional throughout it or just very stoic, but apparently we're already emotional. But my mom isn't alive now to tell her story, and honestly, throughout her whole life, she never had the chance to tell her story. So now I'm being emotional and I'm hopping on here onto YouTube because I know that my experience with her and in telling her story can hopefully help other family members who are dealing with someone who has schizophrenia, or it could help someone who is suffering from schizophrenia and just feels alone and wants to know there are other people out there that understand. Damn, I cannot believe that I haven't even started the story yet, and I am already so emotional. So let me just take a couple moments here and we're gonna get into the story of my life with my mother. So my mom was born July 24th, 1959. She was the oldest of 5 kids, and she was born to 2 parents who were really young at the time. Her mom was only 21 at the time that she had her, but in the 1950s that was kind of normal. But I say that because her parents were kind of inexperienced. They had just been married. They're still working things out. They're young Catholic Irish newlyweds, like having all these kids. And context of family, I believe, is extremely important because schizophrenia is the kind of disorder that a lot of people don't understand why some people get it and some don't. It's believed that there are a lot of genetic factors that contribute to someone having schizophrenia, but there's also believed to be a lot of environmental factors that can contribute to it. And I know that my mom, from a very young age, always felt misunderstood. As I said, she was the oldest of 5 kids, which is kind of odd. But all of her younger siblings were very lively. They were more, I guess, a little more confident and ambitious. And my mom, my grandma always said from a young age, she was always more shy, more withdrawn in a lot of ways. But other than that, she seemed to be a fairly normal child. But it's still key to note that she was withdrawn and that she did struggle with having friendships and relationships as a kid, because that is a sign later in life of someone with schizophrenia, is that they typically tend to be withdrawn, they tend to be really pulled back within themselves, and they also tend to have a lot of trouble maintaining healthy relationships with other humans. And my grandmother even said later that even as a baby, my mom was like that she was just sort of like a quiet baby. She didn't seem very interested in playing with the other babies. She just kind of sat always back and watched other kids. And so that really informs me, but it's also important to note that there definitely were other things, I think, going on in the family that fed into this dynamic that Kathy, my mom, was not as good as the rest of the family. She was getting a lot of messages from a young age that because of maybe her withdrawnness or her introvertedness or whatever you want to call it, that she just wasn't as good as the other kids. So she was subliminally getting these messages that she wasn't good enough. That, and then also overtly, because she also was a child that gained weight from a young age. So I think around 4 or 5, she ended up putting on a bit of weight, whereas her siblings, as they got older, did not gain weight. So she got messages that she was wrong because of her personality, and then also because of her weight from a young age. And then also, who knows what else could have happened to her as a child that I don't know of, that even her siblings wouldn't know of, that she just, some trauma that might have happened to her that she could never speak of. So knowing that family history and that family context can give some insights into someone who later in life develops schizophrenia. But as I said, it's a very mysterious disease, and sometimes someone can have a perfect childhood, still end up being schizophrenic, and sometimes terrible things can happen to a child who ends up growing up normal. It's kind of like this crazy mystery of how things happen. But in my mom's unique case, I know it was a combination of environmental factors, and I'm sure genetic factors, although there's no one else in my family history that we know of that also had schizophrenia, so that's also why it's a little bit confusing with genetics, but here we are. So now I really want to fast forward to the time in her life when I was born. After all, this is my story of my experience with her, and I just feel like I need to stick to my own journey of healing and understanding as much as I can, because as I said, my mom can't be here to tell her experience, so I can only give my own perspective. So my mom was 27 when she had me, and 27, that like late 20s age range, happens to be the age that most people who develop schizophrenia start showing signs and symptoms. Although, disclaimer, as I think I've said, everyone has their own unique story and their own journey with this. So don't take my story today as some sort of like, this is how it always is, because everyone has their own unique story with this. So my mom was 27. She got pregnant accidentally. She was not married. She was having a lot of trouble in her life at that time. She was really trying to find herself in her 20s. She was struggling. She couldn't hold down a job. She was jumping from like a lot of different religions, like trying to find herself. She was really Christian for a while, and then she met my dad through the Rajneesh community. If you've ever seen on Netflix the documentary, I think it's called Wild Wild Country, Osho and those people, that was how my parents met. But when my mom fell pregnant, she was not, like, they weren't really even in a real relationship. Like, they were just kind of casually doing things, ended up getting pregnant, and she decided to keep me. Which at the time, her siblings and her family really judged her for, because she was homeless. I was born in the Boulder Mother's House, which is a house for homeless moms. Like, until I was 4 months old, and my dad came from California to pick us up because he honestly felt bad that he got this lady pregnant and like needed to take care of us, I guess. We lived homeless. And what's really interesting about my mom's story and about schizophrenia in general is I don't think her family at the time saw the signs of schizophrenia. They just saw Kathy as lazy, as someone who couldn't get it together, as someone who was just like not trying hard enough. Of course, as I said, at the time they didn't know what to look for, maybe. So they just like didn't know what to do with her. She's just like this very stubborn lady who got pregnant. She really wanted to keep me, probably because she was incredibly lonely, and she thought that having a baby would make her feel whole, would make her feel wanted. But anyone who has kids knows that when you have a kid for a selfish reason of wanting that kid to fulfill something for you, it usually does not go well, because kids need a lot of help, a lot of validation themselves, and they're actually just physically not able to give their parents this kind of esteem that they want from their kids. So it doesn't usually go that well, which as I grew older was certainly the case for her and I. But instead of getting into the weeds of like all the things that I think that she did wrong as a mother, I want to stick to her story as a schizophrenic and when I, as a child, first noticed the signs of schizophrenia in her. So the first big thing I noticed about my mom that made me think that maybe something was a little off with her or something was a little bit different about her is from a young age, I can always remember my mom talking to herself, and not just like just singing a song to herself or just like saying a few words or whatever. She would have like full-on conversations out loud with herself. And she had very little self-awareness about this because people could be around her and she would still do it. For example, I have one memory, I don't know how old I was, but I was playing on the floor and she was on the couch just like right next to me, and she was just in a full-blown conversation with herself. And I remember sometimes I would get confused because I would turn to her and I think she's talking to me, but she'd actually be talking to herself, and she'd even have like hand gestures that she'd be doing, and she'd be like flipping her hair and laughing and like having this whole conversation. And I just got kind of used to it, I guess. Like in the moments that I would be confused, I would turn to her like, oh, is there something? And then I would realize, oh no, she's just talking to herself. And then I would just go back to playing, like, okay, she's just talking to herself. The other thing that was happening at the time that I was a kid, that I'm still at this moment, I'm not sure if it was the full-blown schizophrenia yet, or if it was just sort of like the precursor leading up to it, but she would get into really big fights with her siblings about things that her siblings would say that she was kind of making up. So for example, I have a memory of coming home from some sort of event at my aunt's house. We got home, my mom was so upset, she was in tears. I thought everything was great at this party at my aunt's house, like I was having a blast, everyone's cool, everyone's laughing and smiling, nothing bad happened at the event. But we got home, my mom is totally in tears, and she picks up the phone and she calls my aunt, and she's just like railing on my aunt, like, I can't believe you were that disrespectful to me, and I can't believe you did this and that. And I don't remember what exactly she was accusing my aunt of doing, but whatever happened at that event, my mom took some meaning out of it, some delusional thing might have happened that really upset my mom, and she physically took it out by actually calling my aunt and confronting her about this thing that probably didn't even happen. And when my mom would act out like that, my family honestly did the thing that a lot of people do with schizophrenia, and they just go, wow, she's crazy. Instead of seeing the way my mom was acting out as a cry for help, that maybe she really needed like medical attention and she needed some serious psychiatric treatment, they would just be like, whoa, get away, you are crazy, we don't really want you around because you make everyone uncomfortable, so we're just gonna invite you less to things. And this is again where you can see that really stark contrast between the way we treat people with depression and the way we treat people with schizophrenia. Because if you had a family member, if your sister was depressed and she called you and she was upset and she said, oh my God, I feel really depressed, I feel like I might kill myself or do something to myself, the sister would probably be like, oh my God, like, let's get you some help, let's get you to a hospital. But when you have a sister or a family member who has schizophrenia, their behavior can be so threatening. That's the only word I can think of. It feels like their behavior is somehow threatening to you, even though it is not. Because as I said, people with schizophrenia are usually the least violent people. They are usually people who have violence acted out on them, unfortunately. And yet in the nature of how they come across and in the nature of how they cry out for help, it naturally pushes people away. And if you're not aware of yourself and your own biases and stigmas, you can push that person even farther into their disease because you're not listening to the signs. I also have to say that at this time in my life, when I'm a child, up until the age of about 12 or 13 for me, my mom was actually a very responsible person. Yes, she talked to herself a lot. Yes, she would sometimes act out in ways that really confused people because she would be making up scenarios that did not actually happen. But something specific about my mom that's not always common in people with schizophrenia is that she was actually a very organized and hygienic person. My mom was someone who really liked routine, and as a kid, that was actually the one thing from her as a mother that I really benefited from, is that she really kept us on, like, at 8 a.m. you always eat breakfast, you always go to school at this time, we're not late, you always go to bed at this time, and she kept our little apartment really nice. So because of that, because she seemed like she was this functioning, structured, clean person, that was probably really confusing for the rest of her family, because it seemed like besides the talking to herself and freaking out about things that she created, she seemed like, well, she's like at least keeping a clean apartment and she seems like she's kind of got it together, so there must not really be something that wrong except that she's just crazy. I should also say that at that time in my life, my mom was getting a lot of financial support from my dad. So obviously, as I said, when I was 4 months old, my dad came back from California to get us, and they attempted for like a year to live together and try to make some sort of couple with a baby worked out, and that was disastrous because, yeah. But luckily my dad was really financially responsible and he paid my mom a lot of child support, and that's what helped her to keep our little apartment that we lived in. And she did have a few house cleaning jobs. That was always what she did. She never really could have a real job. She could only handle stuff like house cleaning because she couldn't handle being around people. So house cleaning worked for her because 1, she loved being clean, and then 2, she could work in people's homes while they were at work, so she didn't have to socialize or be around people. And I say all that because that all changed when I was around 13 years old. And this is where the schizophrenia really gets worse. When I was 13, something changed in my mom and dad's custody agreement. I don't know what, but I ended up technically living with my dad full time, although I also spent a ton of time with my grandmother at that time. And so because I was no longer full-time with my mom, she did not receive any more financial support from my dad. And without that financial support, my mom became homeless. and homeless for the second time as well. As you remember, I was born into homelessness. She was homeless at the time that I was born. And for my mom, I think the trauma of becoming homeless again and losing her kids, so to speak, pushed her over the edge even deeper into schizophrenia. Schizophrenia in general is a progressive disease if it's not treated. So I'm sure it was a mixture of her age progression mixed with that trauma that caused things to go a little bit over the edge. Also, I just need to backtrack a little bit because there's something really important from my childhood that I forgot to mention, and that is that my mom was already having delusions of grandeur when I was a kid. So psychosis and delusions are the two, in my mind, in my situation, the two biggest markers of schizophrenia for my mom. And she would have a lot of delusional statements. Like, for example, we lived in Boulder and we were right around the corner from the JonBenet Ramsey house when that murder happened when I was a kid. And after it happened, she claimed that she knew that it was going to happen. And she even changed her memory so much to say that at one point that she went over to the house the night before to warn Patsy that it was going to happen. And that absolutely did not happen. She did not know that the JonBenet Ramsey murder was going to happen. And she also certainly never went over and tried to warn Patsy. But just that's what her delusion told her, and it was like she was convinced of it. There was no, the thing with schizophrenic people is that once they have this idea, this belief, it's really firm in them, and you can't just tell them, hey, I actually don't think that didn't happen, because in their minds it's like, no, it absolutely did happen. So my mom was already showing that sign from a young age for me. So by the time I'm in high school, my relationship with my mom is basically non-existent. My mom was always very withdrawn and emotionally just like totally absent or very distant. And that's also a sign of schizophrenia because people who have this disorder have a lot of trouble truly staying connected and empathizing emotionally with other humans, even their kids. So as a kid, it was really purely physical proximity that kept me close to my mom. And once I got into high school and I no longer had that, my relationship with her just basically fell apart, and I saw her maybe like twice a year. And this is a part of the story that makes me really sad because I feel like when I was in high school, this is when I became kind of a part of the problem myself. And I was really mad at my mom. I also thought she was crazy. I also was like, why can't she just get it together? All of my aunts and uncles and even my grandma, although my grandma had a lot more empathy for her than other people, but people just really didn't get what was going on with her. They just thought she was like just an immature human that just like couldn't get it together, and why is she homeless, and why can't she make money, and why can't she be around people and be normal? And as an angsty teenager, I was pissed at her too. So I judged the crap out of her for being crazy, and every time I saw her, she kind of reaffirmed what I already believed, which kept me more stuck in my own biases, because every time I saw her, she would say crazier and crazier stuff. It was almost always stuff about how she was being persecuted, about how people, everywhere she went, no one would help her, and she was trying to get these benefits, or she was trying to get this apartment, or she was trying to do this, and it was like, and she always accused people everywhere she went of being like purposely trying to stop her from getting her way, or of being mean to her, or of disrespecting her. And she'd sometimes have these really elaborate stories of things that she would claim they'd say, and I would be there like, Mom, I know that the lady at the tax office did not call you a bitch. Like, I just know that probably didn't happen. So the delusions were getting a lot worse, but also the psychosis was really kicking in then. And I think it's the psychosis that really is the biggest mark for a lot of people when you're trying to identify schizophrenia. Psychosis, which is defined as seeing, hearing, or feeling things that aren't really there. It's those hallucinations. And psychosis can also happen in other disorders. Sometimes psychosis can happen in someone who is bipolar and they're having mania. Sometimes psychosis can happen in people who have problems with drugs. Sometimes psychosis can even happen if you have a medical condition and you're taking a painkiller or something and then you hallucinate and you have psychosis. It can happen in a lot of other contexts, so it's important to consider that when watching this, because another weird thing we do is we can sometimes immediately assume that anyone who has psychosis in their life is automatically schizophrenic, and that's not really true. And I'm really not sure when psychosis set in for my mom, because honestly, I was really triggered by hearing, all of this crazy stuff that she had to say, and I would just tune her out a lot. But in her homelessness, she had a lot of seasons of not having a place to stay and then staying at the homeless shelter. No one in our family was willing to let her live with them. I know my dad tried to allow her to live with him for a bit, and it's just so hard to live with her that people just couldn't take it. So, and that's also really common in families where there's a person who's schizophrenic, because people are so like just threatened by them and don't want them around that they often become homeless. Their families won't take them in, and that was definitely the case with my mom. So she would kind of bounce around between being able to get enough money together to get an apartment for a while to then going back to the homeless shelter. And there was a time where she had an apartment up in the mountains, and every time I saw her, she would be freaking out about this guy who lived next to her, who was always shouting at her through the wall, calling her horrible, vulgar things that I can't even say on YouTube, and like describing like illicit things to her, and just basically like full on harassing, bullying, just like being totally crazy through the wall to her. And I think at first when she told me this, I kind of thought maybe that's true. Like maybe there is a guy who's like totally crazy that lives next to her that says this stuff. But the thing is, from that point forward, every single place she lived, no matter where she lived, this guy was always at the apartment with her. He was always in the apartment next door or the apartment above her. It was always the same guy, and she really, truly, viscerally heard this person. One of the saddest memories in my life is about 2 months before she died of cancer. She had this hellacious cancer that I can't even get into, but she had cancer. It was about 2 months before she died, and she was still living in an apartment that I'm so glad that she had. And at the end of her life, I was lucky enough to get to spend more time with her. I took her to a lot of her doctor's appointments, and I really was trying to make an effort to understand her better and be closer to her, because we knew that she was gonna pass soon. But I have this memory of this one day I went over to her apartment. We actually had a really good time. In my mind, I had brought over Chinese food from our favorite Chinese restaurant. We ate it together and had a pretty normal conversation. And that's actually also something about my mom that it just saddens me, is because she did have these moments where you really felt like, okay, she's here. She's really just a cool, normal person. She's very intelligent, very creative. And I thought that day that we had a pretty normal day. But then the very next day I woke up and I had this text from her where she said, "Please tell me exactly what the man was saying to you when you were in the bathroom at my house, because I'm gonna go complain to the manager of the apartment complex, because when you were in the bathroom, when you were here, I heard that man, he was saying the rudest, most vulgar things to you about XYZ, and I need to have him written up, so I'm gonna go complain to my manager." And my heart just sank, because I knew that there was no man that talked to me through the walls while I was in the bathroom. Like, it was a totally normal, fine day, and it hurts me because I know that I had this experience of it being pleasant, and my mom had this memory of all she really could hear was this guy, you know, saying vulgar things to me through the wall, and that was her experience for so much of her life. So my mom died 2 months later after that, and I am sad to report that she never got a formal diagnosis of schizophrenia, and she never received any mental health help really through her whole life. And it wasn't for lack of trying either. I remember when I was in middle school, before she became homeless and I went to live with my dad, she went and saw a psychologist or psychiatrist or whoever who prescribed her Prozac, because I think they thought that she was depressed. But here's the thing with schizophrenia is a doctor or a psychiatrist can only go off of what the patient tells them. And my mom didn't think there was anything wrong with the delusions or whatever that she had, because that, to her, that was reality. So why would she tell a doctor I'm having these delusions? Because she didn't know they were delusions. She thought they were real, and her family wasn't helping her because no one in her family was encouraging her to really get help. Or if we ever did encourage her to get help in like usually kind of like a backhanded like, oh, you're crazy way, you need help, it usually just pushed her further into her disease, because it wasn't you should get help in an actual like friendly, compassionate way. It was you need help, therefore you're crazy, therefore your delusions about us being against you are correct kind of way. And it wasn't until after she finally died that it fully clicked for me, because my last lucid interaction with my mom was still peppered with my resentment. Another sign that my mom had of her schizophrenia was that she had meanings for things that weren't the actual meaning. So for example, a big one for her was if anyone ever touched their face around her, like if you just casually brushed your hair or if you just touched your face, to her, in her world, that was a really strong sign that you were flipping her off, that you were disrespecting her. And for whatever reason, when I was around her, I guess I touched my hair or my face a lot, and probably because I was nervous around her, I never really knew how to be. So maybe I was always playing with my hair, I was always doing this, who knows? But in my last fairly lucid conversation with her, I remember I was visiting her in hospice, and obviously I was touching my face and not even realizing it. And I was trying to tell her a story, I think, and she interrupted me to say, "You need to stop touching your face. You need to learn how to respect me." And I was so hurt. Like I took it so personally. Like, why can't this woman just see me? Like, why? Like, I'm her daughter and all she sees is like her weird craziness. And it wasn't until after she died that something fully clicked in me that made me realize, maybe that was her last cry for help. That even as she is dying from this horrible cancer, she's still trying to let her family know that she is schizophrenia, and she wants to be seen for having that. Like, I'm so focused on me wanting to get this validation from my mother that she's not capable of giving, and my mom is desperately trying to get someone's attention that there's something wrong going on in her brain, and she was really focused on wanting respect, and in a way that really makes sense. Because throughout her whole life, she got so many messages that she was not respectable, that she was not worthy like other people were, that she was, nothing because she was homeless, because she couldn't keep a job, because she didn't have a husband, she couldn't keep relationships, like all of those things, when really it was just that she was schizophrenic and she needed treatment and she needed someone in her life who could have helped her get treatment. Although with that said, I also have to say that people with schizophrenia, it is true that it's hard to get them sometimes to get treatment because they, in their minds, often don't see that anything is wrong. Part of their delusion is that everyone is against them and everyone else is wrong, and they are the chosen one that knows things that other people don't know, that can hear things other people can't hear. And when people call them crazy, it's again just like more proof that they are the chosen one. So why would they get help? Why would they want treatment? But I know that in my mom's case, no one in our family really authentically tried to even get her help. There was just so much fear and misunderstanding and just wanting her to go away that happened. And like I said, I was a part of that when I got into high school. So if you are someone who has a family member who is showing signs of schizophrenia and you really don't know what to do, if you're feeling really helpless, I would suggest you yourself going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and asking, how can I get treatment, like really good, authentic treatment for this person? The less that you can give into your own fear and stigma about that person, and the more open and curious you are as to what might actually be going on for them and what creative ways and what creative approaches there might be to try to get them help, the less likely the schizophrenic person in your life is going to go even deeper into their disease, and they might actually have a chance to get some treatment. Because another huge misnomer about people with schizophrenia is this belief that they can't be treated, that they can't be helped. But the people that do get treatment and do stick to it live totally normal, happy, full lives. It's a treatable disorder, just like depression, just like anxiety. There are a lot of different treatments for it. And if you're watching this and if you yourself do suffer with schizophrenia, I just want you to know that you are truly valuable. You are not just crazy. You are not defined solely by the disease of schizophrenia. You are a whole person who still has a lot of gifts and amazing things to offer the world, and you have so much value and worth, and you are truly seen. Every single human that comes into this world has their own set of mysterious and unique qualities that make them who they are. And it's so important for us to remember that mental health disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety, those qualities are actually really small in the big picture of who a human really is. Obviously, that doesn't mean that those things aren't important or that those things should be ignored. Obviously, quite the opposite. What I'm saying is that those things can absolutely be addressed so that the real you, your best version of you, can shine through. No matter who you are, no matter what you're suffering with, there are treatments, there are so many options, there is so much love and compassion and connection for you in the world. You are not defined by whatever mask or cage your mental health disorder might be putting you in right now. If my mom was here, I feel like that is what she would want you to know. So thank you so much for taking time to watch this video, to hear my and my mom's story with schizophrenia. If you would like to subscribe to my channel, you are always welcome to. We talk about a lot of random things on this channel. And as always, I also have a Ko-Fi account, so if you would like to support me on Ko-Fi and buy me a coffee, I always appreciate it. Thank you for watching. I hope you really remember who you are today, and I will see you next time.